Welcome to the program. The book is out and it's there. The story is there. The journey continues. But take me back to the start. Republicanism, let alone the extreme wing of republicanism, was it in your family?
Not really. And I suppose, to be honest, in the late 60s, republicanism, as in terms of the IRA and in terms of militant republicanism, was quite small. Obviously, in every generation there had been some sort of insurrection, but you know, the 50s and 60s didn't go very far. I think it's events on the ground. I don't claim to have been very politically aware when I was in my teens, but I was aware of what was going on around me.
What was going on around you?
Well, I mean, what was going on around me, the things that sort of stick out in my mind is, you know, the state forces in the RUC at the time, before the British came in, firing in the Catholic areas. I remember in Divis Flats, a 9-year-old young boy, plus actually a British trooper, Trooper McCabe, and Patrick Rooney, were killed when there was indiscriminate shooting into the flats. So it's one of the things that stuck in my mind. Clearly, Bloody Sunday in 1972, the riots before that, and really having no affinity to the state, but worse than that, you know, I mean, I was a civil servant. When I was about 17, I got a job as a civil servant, actually, local civil servant in what was called the Belfast Corporation Electricity Department at the time. And I seen sort of first-hand, I suppose, the type of discrimination. I was one of the lucky ones. But you wouldn't have got a Catholic in management, you know. They talk about a glass ceiling for women, which exists today, and it does, of course, exist. But then in Belfast and elsewhere, there was a glass ceiling on Catholics, and all of that cumulatively, if you like, build up. But it was mostly what was happening in the streets.
Yeah. Do you remember the day you decided that Gerry Kelly would join the IRA?
Well, I joined Fianna Fáil first, you know, which was a youth group. I suppose, in honesty, I didn't know if I had it in me what might have been necessary. But I certainly saw that, or I believed, you know, agree with me or disagree with me, I believed at the time, and it was a building belief, so I can't put a particular point on it. A building belief that the only way to deal with the type of, because remember the British troops come in then, there was a honeymoon period, and then they also turned absolutely on the nationalist and Catholic population. And there was a building momentum in my own head that, you know, a building belief that the only way you could deal with military force and to deal with that type of oppression was to actually be involved militarily as well.
And in the way the journey was going, the route it was taking, you must have been building in your head the conviction that you would have within you what it would take to do the job of being an IRA man.
Well, I wonder if anybody knows, to tell you the truth, but certainly it was a building response. I mean, I ended up in jail, actually, as a Fianna, and when you come to jail, you get time to think, you get time to read, you start reading up on history, you realise that some of the things that you were going through at that time had happened again and again. And really, you know, the Protestant Parliament for a Protestant people hadn't changed. You know, I came to believe that it was equivalent to an apartheid state. It was it was the Orange State. And yes, I believe that the only way to deal with it was militarily.
Did you sense, with that growing awareness within you, that you were beginning to understand, maybe and walk in tandem with the men of 1916 who had gone a similar journey?
Well, I suppose, in honesty, yes, but I don't know how to quantify it. I mean, it wasn't this revelation that I thought of myself in the same terms as the men of 1916. It was more parochial. You know, it was you know, this was happening in Belfast. It was happening in the areas. I lived in Ballymurphy, White Rock at the time. There was a lot of rioting going on. There was a lot of attacks. There was Catholics being killed. There was pogroms. And I think it was more out of a defensive mechanism than anything else. I think then from that, because that will not sustain you. It will not sustain you in jail, or indeed will not sustain you in struggle. It then built from that into a wider, you know, because you realise what is happening in Belfast. And remember, this, it wasn't exactly the cybernetic age, but we were certainly television, you know, so you knew what was happening in Derry, you knew what was happening in Divis Flats, even if you weren't there, you know what was happening elsewhere. I mean, I remember as far back as Ian Paisley, and I was about 12 or 13. Ian Paisley demanding to come onto the Falls Road to take out the flags there in the Divis Street riots. So there was all these things, and the only way I can describe it is an accumulation of thoughts which eventually make a decision in your head, which frankly was not uncommon for my generation. Of
See, these were huge things that were happening in your community,
Absolutely.
so huge as to drive you to the life-changing moment of joining the IRA.
Yeah.
I have to say to you, at that extent, at that volume of material, in Newry we wouldn't have been aware of it. It was well contained within the certain areas of Belfast and Derry. But we would have felt as bad, but we wouldn't have known it was something that was going to drive young men automatically in.
Well, and it wouldn't do it automatically, in fairness. I mean, there were many people, I mean, it was quite a volume of people who joined the IRA, but it was still a minority. I mean, and, in all conflicts and in all struggles, you will find there is a minority who make that choice. So, and that is not a criticism of those who don't do it, or those indeed praise of those who do it. It is a decision that people make as they become more aware. It was a decision I make. It's no criticism of those who did not, but it's a decision that I made. And as I get further into it, especially when I went into jail and I was able to read up on this, my commitment, because jail's a strange place,
Wow.
of course. But you don't go into jail and come out the same person. So you either stagnate. Well, it's very hard to stagnate, actually. You either go back, you worry about what you did before you went out, or else you advance. And the more I read about history, the more I read about other struggles that were going on in the world at the time. And you remember 1969, remember where this all came from? This all came from the civil rights. So the first demonstration, if you like, the first choice was peaceful protests. The first choice was protesting on the streets. But when the civil rights was hammered into the ground, then big decisions were made. And I do think that Bloody Sunday had probably the biggest effect on my generation, and I was still a teenager at that stage, in my late teens. I had the biggest effect on people's minds at that stage. And everything's within the context of a period of a time.
Bloody Sunday probably moved your heart into IRA membership. But it seems to me, from what you're saying, it was an intellectual decision, that you'd studied the situation, you'd studied the history, you'd studied the provenance, and it was as a consequence of that intellectual effort that you decided to go in.
Well, in fairness, my first decision to go into the Fianna Éireann, which was a youth group, I can't describe as intellectual.
No.
I think it was in reaction.
But there came a moment when the big one came.
I think it was in reaction to what was happening around me. But as I said, that does not sustain you. So then, of course, I thought it out. So when I joined the IRA, I was fairly sure that I could commit myself to it and do what was needed of me in a military conflict. And that is a big personal decision. Yeah.
What was the process for the young man, Gerry Kelly, joining the IRA? What happens? Do you knock somebody's door and say, I want to join, or what happens?
Well, basically, yes.
You do?
Yeah,
and then what happens?
Well, they would bring you through, if you like, at the time, perhaps later it became different, but an education process. They test you out, they bring you through interviews to see if they think that you would make a good volunteer. And some of the stuff that would have been said to you, whether it was I was certainly believed at the time, but they were saying things to you like, you're only going 2 places here if you join the IRA. One is to jail and the other one is possible death. Which sounds a bit dramatic now when I look back, but that was the type of conversation that people would have had, because they didn't want everybody willy-nilly joining. They wanted people of commitment who had to stay in power and who were prepared to do things that in normal circumstances you would not do. I mean, that's what struggle is about.
Would you have been aware, or would you have been made aware, that when you took the oath of membership, if that's what you did, that was the end of it? There would be no getting out of it.
No, and it's a myth.
Is it a myth?
Oh, it's an absolute myth.
How would you get out? If you had wanted, if a man was in and wanted to get out?
Well, that's easy. You just go along, and many did it and said, "Look, I'm leaving."
Yeah.
And that was it. And let me put this in a logical circumstance for you, because it is a myth which seems to travel on through the years. If that was true, then the IRA would have been, and if you just think, just the numbers who went through jail, the Republicans went through jail, you're talking about something like 15,000. Now that's only the ones who went through jail. There was many, many who didn't go to jail and who left the organisation. So you would have been dealing with an army of some 30,000 people, and of course you never were. You were always dealing with a couple of hundred people. So the myth that you get in and there's no way to get out was complete and utter nonsense from the start. And many a person and many a friend I know went in and left, and probably the majority of people who went to jail did not go back, did not return to the conflict or to the IRA after they left jail either.
You had a life sentence imposed upon you. What can you remember as the words were spoken to you? What went on within your body, within your head at that moment?
Well, I do remember it. I was, I think, 20 years of age. Bear in mind that I'd already been in jail.
And as you said, 20, very young.
Yes, and looking back, certainly now, I have more of the perspective of my parents. But it wasn't. If I'm quite honest with you, it wasn't a massive shock. I was, in a strange way, expecting to get a very heavy sentence. Not life, ironically enough. And if I had have been arrested in the north of Ireland, I wouldn't have got life, but I was arrested in England, and therefore I got 2 life sentences in 20 years. So it was a huge sentence. But at that stage, I was committed. I was about, because I'd already made up my mind to go on hunger strike for political status and for a return to a jail in Ireland. So my mind was pretty well made up. So the actual act of sentencing, the judge saying it, didn't have as big an impact as might be thought of.
Did it steel your resolve?
Absolutely.
You looked him straight in the eye and felt, you're not going to get me, mate.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's no question. And youth has great, and I'm saying this at the age I am now, but youth has a great strength. When they are committed, and most struggles are carried out by the younger section of our generation, let's put it that way.
There was the moment in the escape. Your proudest moment, you felt, the escape and going out.
Well, it was a very proud moment, because I don't know what way to describe it, but it's a bit like the underdog story. I had tried to escape on a number of occasions. I had succeeded in escaping once before.
How did you do that?
Well, I went over the wall in Mountjoy Jail, but that was when I was...
It's a very high wall.
It is a very high wall.
How did you do it?
I got some assistance. And actually a dairyman who was the main assistant in it.
Did you stand on shoulders?
I stood not only on his shoulders, but he had to put his hands up, and then I stood on his hands, and then I was still short, and I had to jump from there up to catch a bit of wire, which is actually what saved me, because I didn't actually get right to the top, but a bit of this wire that you would find in reinforcing concrete, and that gave me enough grip to swing over the wall. So it was the wall's about 18.
The whole thing is a kind of Guns of Navarone situation. It's the stuff of movies.
Well, and I suppose in the middle of all of this, there are incidents, and there are, like the escape, which stand out because they're quite dramatic. Well, they are very dramatic occasions, and in terms of the 83 escape, because it was a mass escape, because it was a complex and complicated escape, and because of the atmosphere it was in. This is within 2 years after we had lost 10 comrades on hunger strike, which was a huge personal blow. I mean, it wasn't just, people talk about the hunger strikers, but in jail especially, but also outside, but in jail especially, these were friends as well as comrades. These were people who many hundreds of prisoners would have known because of the community which is a political jail. And there was a slogan at the time which was "Smash H blocks," which was very well known. And after the 10 men died, Republican prisoners do what Republicans do. They said, okay, this is where we're at. Now, how do we move forward? And the slogan "Smash the H blocks," one of the ways to do that, because the British were, well, I was going to say they were practically boasting. Actually, they were boasting that this was supposed to be the most secure prison in Europe. I remember a prison governor saying to me, the only way that, and I was a lifer, the only way that lifers are getting out of here is the same way as the hunger strikers in a brown box. And I didn't say anything back to him. There was no point, but it certainly steeled my determination and many other people's determination.
And obviously that combination gave you no problem in the heat of the, well, it wasn't the heat of the escape, because I'm assuming it was very carefully done, and it was very cold. It would have given you no problem looking that prison guard in the eye and saying, if you move, I will shoot you.
Well, there was a psychology of the escape, and to put it in its context, it is because there was something like 5 to 6 years of protest. I suppose it's not exaggerating to say that there was angst, there was anger, and there was hatred. There was no quarter given by captive or captor. So we had to be careful that it didn't turn into something more than an escape. So the psychology, and this was given to everybody, the psychology of the escape was very simple. It was use verbal aggression so that you do not have to use physical aggression.
Yes.
And there were, of course, 2 prison officers shot. There was a prisoner shot as well. And there was another prison officer who died of a heart attack. And perhaps it's difficult to say, but in the scheme of the magnitude of the escape and the struggle, because this was in a conflict situation, that the escape, I have no hesitation in saying that the escape was a success. Because in the terms of the politics at the time, it did smash the H blocks. It was after 10 men had died, and it showed that it wasn't the most secure prison in Europe, and indeed that the prisoners were still up and ready for the fight, both in jail and outside jail. And of course, we were leaving the jail to rejoin the struggle.
Your presentation here, your style, you're an ordinary enough man in terms of education at school.
Yeah.
You're an intellectual here. You're presenting yourself in a highly lucid and intellectual way. You're not like a fellow who left school early. And that seems to be a hallmark of most of the Sinn Féin people.
Well,
what is it about you?
Well,
what is this growth? They used to call it the Tweed Jacket Brigade. Did you all got that?
Well, I'll tell you, that's very simply explained as well. There were 2 priorities in jail, especially for long-termers, but for any Republican prisoner. One was to educate, and the other one was to escape. And in my balance of things, escaping was more important than education. But I was in jail for over 10 years at the time, and therefore I had been involved in self-education. So you will find a lot of people are self-educated in jail. And then, of course, there were others who went through the formal education. So I don't think I'm very often called an intellectual, but we were political prisoners.
Yeah.
And therefore, to us, jail was a part of the struggle, and you needed to use jail for that issue. So we could have went off and read nothing but cowboy novels, or I think I have a very eclectic reading list behind me. I probably wouldn't have done anywhere near the same reading if I had have been outside jail. But in jail, I read voraciously, and it was the habit of Republican prisoners, at least, perhaps not others.
You had no problem. A proud moment, the moment of the escape. What was not a proud moment for you was the IRA decision to take the bomb into the chip shop on the Shankill Road. Children died, men and women died.
No, that's true. And I would not try to justify it, neither has anyone. It is not justifiable. I think during periods of conflict or war, or people fight over the terms you use here, but certainly there was a political conflict going on. The IRA should not have done it. It did it. A volunteer, Thomas Bagley, was killed. Another was very seriously injured. And so were innocent people, including children. So I will not try and defend it in any shape or form. And I think that the IRA has to take, and indeed did take, responsibility for that. And as an IRA member, before that, having been involved in the early 70s, then I would take a collective responsibility of having been, in other words, I would not distance myself from what the IRA has done, but that doesn't mean to say that I, or indeed any other individual Republican, would agree with everything that the IRA did.
Foolish.
Some horrific, and it's not the only one.
No.
To be honest, I mean,
But maybe clumsy decisions. Obviously, there was going to be collateral damage there if it went off accidentally, and the possibility is that it would have gone off accidentally. So whoever tasked that event, clumsy, awkward, bad management, bad strategy.
Well, forgive me for this, Ronan, but when I say that I wouldn't defend it, then it's nearly incumbent on me not to enter into what I think may or may not have went wrong. I don't think that it was the intent of the IRA to kill innocent people. However,
I would accept that, by the way.
However, innocent people were killed, and they have to take responsibility of that. And I don't say this in any way to be defensive at all, because I think you have to. You've put a particular attack by the IRA to me, and I answer it. But there are many attacks by all the combatant forces. Some of them horrific. You know, there were children also killed by the state.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Caroline Kelly was 12 years old, I think. Julie Livingstone shot at point blank range. One would assume deliberately, because it was a point blank range with rubber bullets and plastic bullets. And there were other attacks. There was collusion where loyalists were used to kill Catholics, not Republicans. I mean, when I was in the IRA, I accepted that I was also a target, because I seen myself and I was indeed a combatant. But I do not make an equivalence, and I think it's very important to say this again and again. I do not make an equivalence between combatant forces and innocent people, because an innocent person is precisely that. If a person is caught up in a conflict or killed, whoever it is, whether it's the IRA, loyalists, the British, RUC, you know, RIR, they're innocent people. But in terms of, because you hear us talking about hierarchy of victims, in terms of the combatant forces, neither do I accept, as seems to be the single narrative, that it was okay if someone was killed by a legal, you know, soldier or whatever, or RUC man or woman. And in some way that's different from, you know, those victims are different from other victims.
That's not what I'm saying to you.
No, I know it's not, but I have extended it into a different...
Let me extend it a little bit then for you. It is as plain as the nose in your face, or my face, that if I go out and put a bomb under an RUC officer's car, and he's a family man, that he's going to be taking his child to school, and that there's a fairly high possibility that if the bomb goes off, the child could be there as well. That's a kind of foolish mission, is it not?
Well, there's an incident of that actually last week, and you will find that I was one of the first ones out to condemn it. Now, the difficulty in the so I'm going to transfer this conversation. The difficulty in the conversation is that we can go through a series of different types of IRA operation, and we can have a philosophical or other discussion around whether it was right or wrong. And the one thing that I cannot do is take responsibility for each individual action that the IRA took out and try and deal with it, or even each individual tactic. For instance, the disappeared. Clearly, because there's a number of people were involved, in my view, it was, if you like, whatever decision was made to bury people secretly is an ongoing wrong, which has yet to be fully righted. No, so I'm very clear about that. What I said about the bomb, and indeed any action which has been carried out at the minute, is that I am as committed to the peace today as I was, and I admit that I was a committed IRA operative when I was in the IRA. But I am as committed to the peace process, to the political process. I was as committed to the negotiations as I was when I was an active volunteer. And that's all that I can say in terms of where we are. Is there a reason for carrying out military activity, if that's what you want to call it, or carrying out these attacks? Then I would say absolutely not. What the Good Friday Agreement was about, which was followed by, and I was involved in them all, which was followed by the St Andrews Agreement and the Hillsborough Agreement, and I am actually one of the people that Sinn Féin has chose to be involved in the Haas talks. What they all did was they set structures and ability to move the process forward. In other words, what the Good Friday Agreement, which was the first one achieved, was a political way forward. Before that, agree with me or disagree with me, certainly Republicans believed that there was no political way forward, and therefore they were involved in a military campaign.
Yeah.
When they saw that there was a political way forward, because making a decision, a personal decision to be involved in any military activity surely has to be the last decision that you make. You
But that
have to have tried every other.
That
every other
decision
action.
has made you today a target from dissident Republicans.
And
Do you feel the weight of that threat on your shoulders?
Well, I have spent my whole adult life in some sort of, I suppose, threat, with many others, by the way. I'm not trying to make me out, that I have the threat. So I don't really feel it in that sense, except, if I may say this, one of the things that I discovered as the children became teenagers was that they started asking questions. When a threat came in, for instance, they said, do we need to lock the doors at night, and what do we need to do, and do we need to ask people when they come to the doors, and should we open the door, and all of that. And I realized then that it starts to affect the people around you, the people that you love, and you have to take more cognizance of it than if you were a person living on their own. And, it's a part of what you have chosen to do. So in that sense, I take more attention to it, pay more attention to it.
The British came to you and said, talk to us. Major moment. They were putting, in their terms, a cloak of respectability around your shoulders and bringing you in. You were the tough man of the talks. You were the stony-faced, silent one. You kept McGuinness right because you passed him notes. Did he need much keeping right?
No, he didn't. And this is another one of these sort of myths. And forgive me for, I suppose you're saying from their point of view, but the cloak of respectability is not something
I'm glad you noticed the nuance.
No, I didn't notice the nuance. At the beginning, one of the things you have to remember is we had no experience in negotiations, and we had a notion that the British were this huge. And I do some work abroad now, talking to in peace processes like in the Philippines and in Burma and places like that. And I've met armed groups, and I've as well as the governments, and I've said to them, you're sitting there thinking that the government is this huge, well-oiled machine which has thousands of years of experience in negotiations, but they don't. Now, in a certain way, we sort of were looking at that at the beginning of these negotiations. So we stepped into them fairly cautiously. And we would do pre-meetings before that. Martin McGuinness was the chief negotiator. He seldom needed my advice, or indeed, remember, it was a team. But my job at the beginning was as, if you like, a sweeper, In other words, we knew what we were going to say, and the reason I was silent, and I used to annoy the Brits a lot, which gave me some faint pleasure.
Sorry you were struggling for a word there. I thought I'd help you.
But but part of my job was, if something was missed, I would have passed a note rather than step into the discussion, because it's a bit like playing a chess game. If you're standing watching the game, you sometimes see things which the player can't see. So it was nearly as straightforward as that. And Martin McGuinness was absolutely in charge, believe me.
Talk to me about the chronology of it. Did the governmental discussions start with the British or start with the Irish? Did the Irish come in at some point that was considered desirable?
Well, it's a pretty long story, but in terms of my own involvement, what happened was that Martin McGuinness, for some period of time, would have been getting messages through a back channel, which were quite sporadic. Where I joined him was in 1993. I got out of jail in 1989. I joined Sinn Féin. I was asked in 1994 to join the negotiating team by Sinn Féin's Art Corlia. And we met in 93. I was actually asked to go with Martin to meet the British in Derry, actually. And that was a secret meeting, if you like.
First meeting?
The first meeting that I was at. And what I remember from it was that they told us basically that it was inevitable there'd be United Ireland, that it was only a matter of time, etc., etc., etc. And we may have had some naivety, we weren't that naive, And we had already, because we had to test all this out. And you can follow Gerry Adams's approach to this I think his first book was A Pathway to Peace, but right beyond the 80s. But if you really want, the books at the 80s, where he was basically saying, all conflicts have to have a way of being brought to an end. And, it is my view, for what it's worth, that modern conflicts, especially, there's only end in one of two ways. Either absolute victory and defeat of one side over another. And I would argue that seldom in modern history do you get that. It's just the way the world is. And if you don't, then at some point in a conflict or a struggle, you go to negotiations. Mm-hmm. And that is the way to try and end that. It is an extension, if you like, of the struggle. And, whatever we thought at the beginning, we were testing each other out. Peace negotiations develop their own momentum. And generally it's a good momentum, because once you find, and it might be a small number of people at the start on both sides or on all sides who want to move the process forward, then you can see that building. And I think that's what, it's maybe an oversimplification of how we went about it. But Gerry Adams, I think you can spot right into the 70s of having those thoughts. John Hume then became very influential. Took big steps. It was hard for a leader to take, and indeed he did not have great support within his party for doing it at the time, but I think has been proven to be right. And then you had people like David Trimble, who saw, if you like, I don't want to speak for him, but certainly the inevitability of dealing with opponents and enemies.
You have moved a long way along the road. You've been an IRA man, government minister. The journey continues. The ultimate journey success will be a united Ireland, or a new Ireland, as you would prefer to refer to it, I suppose.
Well, no, I'd like it to be United Ireland. That's what my aim is, but it is the type of a United Ireland, of course. And there's no miracle in a United Ireland, and I say this all the time. You have to prepare for the type of Ireland you want, and it has to be an Ireland which is better than the sum of the two parts. In other words, for ordinary people who are Irish, who see themselves as Irish, you have to say, this is better for you. And when I say that, I'm talking about the Unionists, I'm talking about every section. We are now entering into, if you like, an intercultural society. It's a relatively new experience for Ireland. Many other countries.
See, you're probably, one of the chapters still in the journey is, if you like, the conversion of the Unionists to like you, not like you, but like what you stand for and where you've been, and to, in a sense, forgive you in their terms for what you have done. In their terms.
Of course, forgiveness goes both ways.
It does. You're nowhere close to that. And this book, perhaps, is coming maybe, or is it, 10 years too early, because you're pushing them back from a point at which they may have been clawing their way towards shaking your hand and saying, we'll go forward together.
Well, I wouldn't give the book, and I like to promote it, but I wouldn't really give it that big a credibility. This is a story about a huge...
But the credibility you gave it was to say that the importance of the struggle had to be recorded. Yes. In history. That's the importance I'm giving it.
No, and in that I agree with you entirely. I don't think that we can refuse to write our history. And it's the reason it came at this time, just to be very clear, was it has been in my head for maybe 5 years or so. And I was doing bits and pieces and talking to people and writing bits and pieces down. And then when I realized the 30th anniversary was coming up, I said, well, let me make the effort and try and get it out for the 30th anniversary. The 30th anniversary was on the 29th of September. I missed the deadline, and then it came out in October. So there's people that are reading all sorts of things into the timing. The timing, frankly, was just that. You see, the difficulty with unionism, if I may say this, and I mean, I'm for reaching out, and we actually are the only party who has an outreach department. People who actually, on a continual basis, try and reach out to our opponents, if you like, politically. But I can't accept, the single narrative. And there is almost a demand that the only narrative is the unionist narrative. And I'm not saying that the only narrative is the Republican narrative. I'm actually
How do
very
you
far
change
away
that?
from it.
How do you
Well,
how do you get the amalgamation
Well,
of ideals?
Well, I don't think we can have, I don't think we will ever agree, for instance, on the escape as an example. We will never agree as unionists or the British or ourselves on that, what the context and what the importance of that was. I mean, they have a view that they would like to bulldoze the jail. I mean, the question has to be asked, well, why would you want to bulldoze the jail? Surely that is also part of our history. Should I say take down every semblance of British rule here? No, I don't. I mean, even if you go back to the flags protests, you know, and as I sit here today, Belfast is probably around 50-50, close to 50-50 nationalists and Republicans and unionists and loyalists. So it is to me an equality issue to say then surely the City Hall should reflect that. And as we said here, 95% of all the emblems are pro-British, indeed imperialist and all of that. Now I'm not saying we need to get rid of all of that. What I'm saying is, you know, there are Irish people here as well. You know, we need to try and deal with that. We have children who are bilingual, and very proud of that. When I was young, I had a brother called Sean. He's still called Sean. He couldn't put his name down in Irish. My mother couldn't put his name on a birth certificate in Irish. She had to put down John. Right. So it's huge. That's just a wee anecdotal issue. So to go back to the question, I think while reaching out, it can't be on the basis that we kowtow to here's the unionist view of things. Now, the unionists, frankly, and I have to make the generalization because I also have to say this, there are unionists who shake my hands. There are unionists who talk to me. I'm on all sorts of committees with unionists. Actually when I go abroad, I go with unionists as well to talk to other people about what happened here and how, because it's looked upon as a very successful peace process. There are still some who cannot deal with the fact of my past, but I don't run away from a past. I know what my past was, and I know what their past was as well. And I have to accept, you know, people who were in the UDR, people who were in loyalist organisations, people who were in the British, the SAS, all the rest of it, who frankly killed comrades and at times quite a few of my friends. But if we want to move forward, then we all have to start working out, can we deal with all the narratives, not accepting them, not taking my view of history, but accepting that I have a view of history, and then let's try and agree, because the only thing we may agree on, and have agreed on to a great extent at the moment, is what the future is going to be.
Are you, in the future, biting at Gerry Adams' heels? Are you destined to be the Seamus Mallon of Sinn Féin, that you will always be the bridesmaid and never the bride, so to speak?
Well, first of all, I'm not the bridesmaid.
There's laughter on the wings here, so it suggests an element of truth in that.
No. It's.
But I mean,
there's laughter because it is funny. I have no.
But you must have aspirations to the leadership.
No, I don't. I have absolutely none.
You sound like a leader.
Well, I might sound like a leader, but I can tell you, I have no notion, thought, idea of leading Sinn Féin.
Would it not be natural for you to so have?
No, I'm in the generation, you know, he's slightly older than me, but I'm in the generation of Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams, right? I'm slightly younger than him, and I'll hold on to that. I've just turned 60. There is a generation coming up, of course.
Certainly not the Lady of Dublin.
Well, I'm not going to start talking about who may or may not be that person or people. What I'm saying is there's a new generation coming up, and there is an unfinished business. And thankfully, the military end of it is over. You know, that was what we believed we had to do. I don't want my children to do it. I don't want anybody else's children to have to do it. But you asked me a personal question, so, and it won't only be my family will be laughing. I mean, everybody will be laughing. Anybody who knows me will know that I have no ambitions for that job. And I think I'm in the generation who will be replaced, which is the good thing. That's what it should happen. Not for a while yet, but so I'm doing whatever part in the struggle I have. I'm elected MLA. I'm on the policing board. I lead on policing. I have been a minister, and any of the jobs that I've been given in this struggle, I hope that I have given, you know, as best I could. Maybe nobody ever gives their full best, but I tried. And I'm proud to do that, and I will continue on that until I feel it's time to go out the grass and enjoy my life. And I have enjoyment now, so there's no complaints there.
It's Gerry Kelly for you. Gerry Kelly, go well. Take care.
Thank you.